All them.
Namaskar, Honorable Vice Chancellor, Indira Gandhi National Open University, Professor Nageshwar Rao sir, Pro Vice Chancellor of IGNOU, Professor R.P. Das sir, Professor Satyakam sir, Professor Uma Kanjilal ma'am, Professor Sumitra Kukreti ma'am, Dr. S.K. Mohapatra sir, and Professor M.S. Meena sir. Our distinguished guest for today's webinar, Professor Ramesh Chandra Bhardwaja ji, Vice Chancellor, Maharshi Valmiki Sanskrit University, Mundri, Kaithal, Haryana. Professor Suneet Verma and Dr. Monica from Delhi University, all the directors, registrars, head of divisions, colleagues, students, and distinguished participant who has joined us today virtually through Zoom link or IGNOU Facebook Live or YouTube channel. A very warm welcome to you all. On behalf of Indira Gandhi National Open University, it is indeed a great honor and pleasure for me to welcome you all for this national webinar on Shri Aurobindo and his vision for humanity. Shri Aurobindo Ghosh was one of the most prominent Indian nationalist, freedom fighter, philosopher, yogi, and guru. He developed his own vision of human progress and spiritual evolution. I have very little knowledge of philosophy, but when I was reading his biography, I found that the central theme of Aurobindo's all work is in the evolution of human life into life divine. He wrote, and I quote, "Man is a transitional being. He is not final. The step from man to superman is the next approaching achievement in the earth evolution." Born in Calcutta, then the capital of British India on 15th August 1872, Aurobindo Ghosh, his name is Aurobindo Ackroyd Ghosh. The Western middle name was given to by his father at birth. Was the third son of his parent, Dr. Krishna Nandan Ghosh and Swarnlata Devi. In Sanskrit, the word Aurobindo means lotus. Aurobindo's father chose this name for him, thinking that he was unique, but he little suspected that in the language of occultism, the lotus is the symbol of divine consciousness. Shri Aurobindo, who had started writing at an early age, even during his study at Manchester in 1879 to 84, had continued with his creativity through all the turbulent phase of his life, even during his incarnation. His first book, a collection of poems entitled Song to My Tilla, was published in 1895. Between that and the last work to be published during his lifetime, Savitri, 1950, he had written extensively on yoga, culture, sociology, in addition to his poetry, and played contribution of far-reaching and multifaceted importance to human thought in action. He has given a new cosmology and a new metaphysics in the life divine, considered as the philosophical masterpiece of the century. During his stay in Pondicherry, Shri Aurobindo evolved a new method of spiritual practice, which he has called integral yoga. The central theme of his vision was the evolution of human life into a life of divine. In 1926, with the help of his spiritual collaborator, Meera Alfasa, the mother, he founded the Shri Aurobindo Ashram. He died on 5th December 1950 in Pondicherry. Shri Aurobindo helped us understand our limitation, mapped out a way to become more integrated individual. He revealed to us the unseen forces at work in life and ultimately revealed the source of creation and the destiny of humanity and the universe. In the midst of the darkness and distress of today's world, Aurobindo provides a ray of hope to mankind. He envisaged a new man, a new society, and a new civilization. Today, on this occasion, we are very much honored by the gracious presence of our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Nageshwar Rao sir, and express our heartfelt gratitude to you for your blessings, guidance, and always inspiring us, motivating us to give our best, whether it is launching of new programs or revision of existing program or offering the program in different Indian languages or any other activities, academic work, you have always been a guiding source for us. We are honored and delighted by the gracious presence of today's chief guest, Professor Ramesh Chand Bhardwaj ji, Vice Chancellor, Maharshi Valmiki Sanskrit University, Kaithal, who has very kindly consented to share his vast knowledge and experience with us. Not only today, but whenever we call him, he has very kindly agreed, despite his very busy schedule. Today, he will be speaking on Shri Aurobindo and Cultural Renaissance of India. We warmly welcome you, sir. We are delighted to have the gracious presence of our esteemed speaker, Professor Suneet Verma and Dr. Monica ma'am from Delhi University, and warmly welcome you both. Shri Aurobindo upholds the religion of humanity as the very essence of human unity. Shri Aurobindo's 150th birth anniversary was on 15th August, and to commemorate his 150th birth anniversary today, through this seminar, we are making an attempt to reflect upon the idea of humanity and its possibility in the light of Rishi Aurobindo's philosophy on how to maintain diversity in oneness and what would be the religion of humanity. With these words, I once again welcome you all for this webinar and express my heartfelt thanks for joining us here. Now, I request Professor Nandini Sinha Kapoor to please introduce the guest and moderate the seminar. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sachi Shah ji. Honorable Vice Chancellor Sir, Professor Nageshwar Rao ji, Honorable Vice Chancellor Professor Ramesh Chandra Bharadwaj ji of Maharshi Valmiki Sanskrit University, the keynote speaker, respected Pro Vice Chancellors of IGNOU, respected guest speakers, Professor Suneet Verma ji and Dr. Monica Gupta ji, respected Director Professor Sachi Shah ji, dear colleagues, dear students and distinguished participants. Once again, welcome to the national webinar, Shri Aurobindo and his vision for humanity. We are commemorating the 150th birth anniversary of Shri Aurobindo. We are privileged to have a very distinguished keynote speaker this morning with us, Professor Ramesh Chandra Bharadwaj ji, Honorable Vice Chancellor of Maharshi Valmiki Sanskrit University at Kaithal. I shall briefly introduce Professor Bharadwaj ji. He's been an honorary director of Gandhi Bhavan, University of Delhi, professor in charge, Department of Sanskrit, South Campus, University of Delhi, treasurer, governing body, School of Open Learning at University of Delhi, vice president, Gandhi Hindustani Sahitya Sabha Rajghat, New Delhi. He has acquired traditional qualifications such as Shastri and Acharya and obtained his MA, MPhil and PhD from University of Delhi. He has received research training at Tokyo University, Japan. He is very much adept in Oriental languages like Sanskrit and Avestan, and also in modern Indian languages, Hindi, Gujarati, Bodo, and Marathi, and in foreign language like Japanese. He has 33 years of undergraduate and postgraduate teaching experience in the University of Delhi in Sanskrit and philosophy departments. He is currently working on Aryan project, including Vedic chronology in the light of textual, archaeological, linguistic, and other evidences. He has been honored with the following awards: Sanskrit Vidya Martanda, Sanskrit Seva Puraskar, Vidyanand Saraswati Vedic Award. He has a vast administrative experience, including convenership of Sanskrit Courses Committee, CBSE, New Delhi. He has been a member of institutional advisory body appointed by NCERT and Ministry of Education. He has been a member of international committees, including ICCR Chair of Sanskrit and Indian Philosophy at Mauritius. He has also headed Japanese Hindi translation project. He has published many books in Hindi, English, and Sanskrit, also in tribal Bodo language. He has edited books on Gandhian studies, including Lokpriya Gopinath Bordolai, Historic Speeches of Mahatma Gandhi, among others. He has a large number of published research articles in research journals and a large number of academic programs that he has organized for Indian Council for Cultural Relations. He has organized a large number of important international, regional, national seminars and workshops, and delivered a large number of special lectures in India and abroad as keynote addresses. With that very brief introduction of Professor Ramesh Chandra Bharadwaj ji, now I invite Professor Bharadwaj ji to deliver his keynote speech, Shri Aurobindo and the Cultural Renaissance of India. Bharadwaj ji.
Oh, respected Professor Nageshwar Rao ji, Honorable Vice Chancellor of IGNOU, and friends. Well, as a Gandhian, this is my duty to say something through my mother tongue, Hindi. So kindly permit me to say something in Hindi. महर्षि अरविंद और उनका जो भारतीय सांस्कृतिक पुनर्जागरण में योगदान है, इस विषय को लेकर मैं आपके सामने उपस्थित हुआ हूं। हम जानते हैं कि हजारों साल की गुलामी के बाद जब राजा राम मोहन राय के समय में भारतीय पुनर्जागरण का कार्य प्रारंभ किया गया, उसके बाद देवनाथ ठाकुर हों, रविन्द्रनाथ टैगोर हों, स्वामी रामकृष्ण परमहंस हों, और सबसे मुख्य जो कड़ी स्वामी विवेकानंद, उसके बाद देश में एक राजनीतिक, सामाजिक, सांस्कृतिक, आध्यात्मिक, साहित्यिक पुनर्जागरण का कार्य प्रारंभ हुआ। महर्षि अरविंद के सांस्कृतिक पुनर्जागरण में योगदान को लेकर अगर हम देखें तो 15 दिसंबर 1918 से लेकर 15 जनवरी 1921 तक आर्य पत्रिका में उन्होंने जो भारतीय संस्कृति के विषय में लेख लिखे और जो बाद में फाउंडेशंस ऑफ इंडियन कल्चर नाम की बुक के फॉर्म में न्यूयॉर्क से अरविंद आश्रम के लोगों ने छापा, वो एक हमारा आधार बनता है। महर्षि अरविंद के इन विषयों को समझने की कुछ कोशिश कर सकते हैं। मगर आश्चर्य की बात यह है कि जितने भी भारतीय समाज के पुनर्जागरण में योद्धा तैयार हुए, उन सबकी जो दृष्टि है, समझ है, वो एक जैसी ही है। 1909 में गांधी ने जो हिंद स्वराज लिखा और 1918 से 1921 तक जो अरविंद ने लिखा, उन सबका जो गूढ़ अर्थ था वो यही था कि वेस्टर्न या इंग्लिश कॉलोनियल सिस्टम के अंदर जिस तरह से भारतीय सांस्कृतिक और सामाजिक परंपराओं को धिक्कार करके और वेस्टर्न कल्चर को ऊपर रखकर जिस तरह से भारतीय परंपराओं को पददलित किया जा रहा था, और उसका जवाब देने के लिए हमारे देश के ये राष्ट्र पुरुष किस तरह से उस विषय को ले रहे थे। आप सभी जानते हैं कि महर्षि अरविंद के जीवन को अगर देखते हैं तो उनके माता पिता ने उनको इंग्लैंड पढ़ने भेजा और ग्रीक, लैटिन, इंग्लिश, फ्रेंच, इन विदेशी भाषाओं में वो प्रवीण हुए। बाद में अपने मित्र जो उनके साथ लंदन में पढ़ते थे, केशवराव देशपांडे, उनके साथ मिलकर वो बड़ौदा महाराजा की सेवा में चले गए और बड़ौदा में रहते हुए उन्होंने एक अनुष्ठान और एक संकल्प लिया गंगनाथ विद्यालय की स्थापना की। और मेरे आचार्य काका साहब कालेलकर, जो बाद में गांधी जी के साथी हुए, उन्होंने 1911-12 में महर्षि अरविंद द्वारा स्थापित गंगनाथ विद्यालय के प्राचार्य के रूप में काम किया। गंगनाथ विद्यालय का उद्देश्य था कि वहां पर 700 के करीब महर्षि अरविंद की कल्पना के अनुसार योद्धा तैयार करने थे, जो इस देश को स्वातंत्र्य की ओर ले जाएंगे। मगर वो आश्रम, वह विद्यालय बंद कर दिया गया। महर्षि अरविंद को भी बड़ौदा छोड़ना पड़ा और बाद में वो क्रांतिकारी हुए और बाद में उन्होंने एक नई जीवन दृष्टि मानव जाति को देने के लिए पांडिचेरी में अरविंद आश्रम की स्थापना की। उन्हीं दिनों अर्चर करके जो एक विदेशी विद्वान थे, उन्होंने भारतीय सभ्यता संस्कृति को लांछित करने के लिए, खंडन करने के लिए किताब लिखी। इसका खंडन करते हुए महर्षि अरविंद ने अपने इन लेखों को लिखा और उसमें वो जो भारत की सांस्कृतिक परंपराएं हैं, उनको जिस वैचारिक आधार भूमि के आधार पर, दृढ़ भूमि के आधार पर वो प्रस्तुत करते हैं, भारतीय संस्कृति की विशेषता बताते हुए वो लिखते हैं, A true happiness in this world is the right terrestrial aim of men, and true happiness lies in the finding and maintenance of a natural harmony of spirit, mind and body. भारतीय परंपराओं के अनुसार आत्म तत्व, बुद्धि तत्व और शरीर, इन तीनों के बीच में हार्मोनी की स्थापना करते हुए जो भारतीय चिंतन परंपरा है, वो एक संपूर्ण मानव के रूप में कल्पना करती है। वो भारत की सामाजिक व्यवस्था, जिसका कि वो खंडन करते हैं विदेशी विद्वान, उसके विषय में लिखते हैं, India's social system is built upon this conception. Our philosophy formulates it. A religion is an aspiration to the spiritual consciousness, and its fruits, her art and literature, have the same upward look. Her whole dharma or law of being is founded upon it. और इस भारत की शक्ति को उनके शब्दों में अगर कहेंगे तो India is the Bharat Shakti, the living energy of a great spiritual conception, and fidelity to it is the very principle of existence. यानी भारतीय समाज जो है मूल रूप से अध्यात्म प्रधान समाज, और इस अध्यात्म प्रधान समाज की जो भी आधार भूमि है वो हमारी भारतीय सांस्कृतिक परंपराएं हैं। ये सही है कि यूरोप ने या पाश्चात्य सभ्यता ने उन भारतीय तात्विक दृष्टि को दबा करके हमारे सामने एक ऐसा वातावरण क्रिएट किया कि हमने अपनी भारतीय परंपराओं को भूलकर हम पूरी तरह से पाश्चात्य सभ्यता के गुलाम आज भी बने हुए हैं। और ऐसे समय में जब हम ये देखते हैं कि पूरी भारतीय परंपराएं, पूरी भारतीय सांस्कृतिक निधि, उसकी अवहेलना करके हम लोग एक इस तरह की पश्चिमी सभ्यता के पीछे भागे जा रहे हैं जो न केवल हमें अपनी जड़ों से दूर करती है बल्कि हमें एक भ्रांति की अवस्था में लेते हुए जा रही है। भारतीय सांस्कृतिक पुनर्जागरण के विषय को उठाते हुए महर्षि अरविंद ऋग्वेद, उपनिषद, संपूर्ण ब्राह्मण साहित्य, रामायण महाभारत और संपूर्ण भारतीय साहित्य की परंपराओं को उकेरते हुए दो विषयों पर हमारा ध्यान आकृष्ट करना चाहते हैं। पहला विषय ये कि भारतीय सांस्कृतिक परंपराओं में कंटिन्यूटी है, उसमें कोई ब्रेक नहीं है, वह सातत्यपूर्ण परंपरा है। और दूसरा विषय जो है कि ये जो सातत्यपूर्ण भारतीय सांस्कृतिक विकास है, जो कि 18वीं या 19वीं या 20वीं शताब्दी में पूरी तरह से आज नजरअंदाज कर दिया गया है, ये सार्वकालिक भी है। और इस सार्वकालिक साहित्य को दिखाने के लिए वो न केवल भारत शक्ति, जिसको उन्होंने भारत की आध्यात्मिक शक्ति के रूप में चिन्हित किया, बल्कि उसके साथ ही उनका दूसरा विषय ये भी था कि ये भारतीय संस्कृति केवल भारतीय समाज की नहीं है। अगर हम महात्मा गांधी के हिंद स्वराज के उन पंक्तियों को देखें, जहां महात्मा गांधी ये कहते हैं कि भारतीय समाज आज बेशक पददलित है, गुलाम है, उसके बावजूद भी पश्चिमी समाज को देने के लिए उसके पास अभी भी बहुत कुछ है। और भारत को अपनी उन सभ्यता और संस्कृति की परंपरा को इसलिए रखना है क्योंकि वो संपूर्ण मानव जाति के भविष्य को बनाने वाली, दृष्टि देने वाले, उसके अंदर वो तत्व हैं। उन्हीं चीजों को फाउंडेशंस ऑफ इंडियन कल्चर नामक पुस्तक में हमारे महर्षि अरविंद भी प्रस्तुत करते हैं। एक विषय ये है, लोग कहते हैं कि आप जब ये कहते हैं कि हजारों साल की गुलामी के बाद इस पुनर्जागरण काल में क्या हुआ, तो उस समय ये हमारे लिए चिंता का विषय, लोग कई बार प्रश्न पूछते हैं कि क्या मुसलमानों के दास्ता युग में ये विषय इतना गंभीर नहीं था जितना कि विषय ये यूरोपियन कॉलोनियल सिस्टम के अंदर बना। हमको अगर अपने मध्यकाल का इतिहास देखना पड़ता है तो हम देखते हैं कि स्वामी रामानंद कबीर महाराष्ट्र में, ज्ञानदेव महाराष्ट्र में ही नामदेव, इधर पंजाब में गुरु नानक, ये जो एक सगुण और निर्गुण संत परंपरा थी, इन निर्गुण सगुण संत परंपरा के ऋषियों ने, आचार्यों ने करीब 800 साल तक वैदिक या उपनिषदिक या योग वासिष्ठ जैसे योग और एवं अन्य दर्शनों के आधार पर उन्होंने भारतीय समाज को जागृत करके रखा। महर्षि अरविंद इस विषय को बहुत गंभीरता से लेते हैं और इस प्रश्न का उत्तर देते हैं कि मुस्लिम शासन के समय हमारे इन ऋषियों ने 2 बड़े काम किए। पहला काम तो ये कि भारतीय सांस्कृतिक परंपरा की जो विचार निधि है, जो विचार तत्व है, उसको उन ऋषियों ने उस समय जो नई नई भारतीय भाषाएं तैयार हो रही थी, चाहे तमिल हो, चाहे गुजराती हो, चाहे मराठी हो, चाहे पंजाबी हो, चाहे वो तेलुगु हो, इन सब भाषाओं के साहित्य में उन्होंने भारतीय सांस्कृतिक तत्वों को पिरो करके समाज के सामने प्रस्तुत किया और वो पूरा साहित्य भारतीय समाज के लिए संजीवनी बन गया। मगर जब ये पाश्चात्य या पश्चिमी सभ्यता का हम पर आक्रमण हुआ तो उसको महर्षि अरविंद आर्चर के शब्दों को लेते हुए कहते हैं कि ये पूरा का पूरा एक पॉलिटिकल ड्रामा है, यानी ये पूरा विषय राजनीति से प्रेरित है, क्योंकि जो पाश्चात्य सभ्यता और समाज के लोग हैं वो भारतीय सांस्कृतिक मूल्यों की तिरस्कार पूर्वक अवहेलना करते हुए एक नई तरह का समाज में एक क्लास पैदा कर रहे हैं। और ये जो पॉलिटिक्स है, इस पॉलिटिक्स का उत्तर देने के लिए हमको अपनी भारतीय सामाजिक, धार्मिक, आर्थिक और जितनी भी चिंतन परंपराएं हैं उनके मूल तत्वों को देखते हुए ही हमको अपने लिए काम करना है। क्योंकि इस समय आपने सिर्फ 20 मिनट का दिया है, इसलिए बहुत मुश्किल है महर्षि अरविंद के उन सब विचारों को आपके सामने प्रस्तुत करना। मगर अंत में मैं महर्षि अरविंद के जो उस पुस्तक के अंत में उन्होंने सार रूप में दिया है उसको प्रस्तुत करना बहुत आवश्यक प्रतीत होता है। इसमें वो ये बताते हैं कि ऐसा नहीं है कि ये पहली बार विदेशी आक्रांताओं ने, विदेशी विचारों ने भारतीय सांस्कृतिक मूल्यों पे आक्रमण किया हो। हमारा पिछला इतिहास बताता है कि हमारे पूर्वजों ने किस तरह से इन चुनौतियों का सामना करते हुए अपनी सांस्कृतिक परंपराओं को बचाया है। महर्षि अरविंद लिखते हैं, That was in fact what our own ancestors did, never losing their originality. यानी भारतीय चिंतन परंपरा के ऋषियों ने अपने मौलिक तत्व की कभी अवहेलना या उसको नहीं खोया, नेवर इफेसिंग देयर यूनिकनेस। भारतीय सांस्कृतिक तत्व मीमांसा में जो यूनिकनेस है उसको भी उन्होंने परिवर्तन करने की कोशिश नहीं की, because always vigorously creating from within with whatever knowledge or artistic suggestion from outside they thought worthy of acceptance or capable of an Indian treatment। यानी हमको आज भी अगर अपने भारतीय समाज का पुनर्निर्माण करना है, रिजनरेट करना है इंडियन सोसाइटी को, तो हमको अपने जो मूल तत्व हैं, मौलिक तत्व हैं भारतीय सांस्कृतिक चिंतन परंपरा के, उनको बिना उनकी मौलिकता को खोए, बिना उनके साथ कोई कंप्रोमाइज किए हुए जो आज हमारे आसपास विदेशी तत्व, विदेशी विचार, साइंस, टेक्नोलॉजी या अन्य विषय भी आए हुए हैं, उन सबको भारतीय संदर्भों में उसका ट्रीटमेंट करके, उसका उपचार करके हमको ग्रहण करना चाहिए। एक सबसे बड़ी जो चीज महर्षि अरविंद ने अपने उन बातों में कही वो है द स्पिरिट ऑफ द इंडियन रिनेसेंस विल टेक केयर ऑफ द रेस्ट। यानी ये भारतीय समाज का पुनर्जागरण अपनी व्यवस्था खुद कर लेगा, उसकी आप चिंता मत कीजिए। The power of the universal time spirit which has begun to move in our midst for the creation of a new and greater India। यानी भारत को एक महान देश के रूप में हमको प्रस्तुत करना है, और वो केवल इसलिए नहीं करना है कि हमको भारत को बचाना है, भारतीय सांस्कृतिक मूल्यों को अपने भारतीय समाज के लोगों के लिए बचाना है, बल्कि महर्षि अरविंद कहते हैं, जैसे कि महात्मा गांधी ने भी कहा कि ये जो भारतीय चिंतन परंपरा है, ये जो भारतीय तत्व मीमांसा है, ये जो भारतीय ज्ञान परंपरा है, इसका उद्देश्य संपूर्ण मानव जाति को खुश करने के लिए, उनके भविष्य के, अच्छे भविष्य के निर्माण के लिए इसकी हमको आवश्यकता होती है। मगर मैं प्रोफेसर नंदिनी, प्रोफेसर जी आपका धन्यवाद दूंगा। मैंने महर्षि अरविंद का ये विषय आज से करीब 25 साल पहले अपनी युवा अवस्था में पढ़ा था, और उसके बाद मुझे अवसर नहीं मिला कि मैं फिर से उसको रिविजिट करूं महर्षि अरविंद के विचारों को। मगर आपने मुझे एक अवसर दिया कि मैं महर्षि अरविंद के जो भारत के और मानव जाति के भविष्य के निर्माण के लिए जो एक दृष्टि है, जो उन्होंने आज से 100 साल पहले 1918 से 1921 के बीच में, 101 साल हो गए हैं आज 101 साल के बाद आज महर्षि अरविंद की 150वीं जयंती के अवसर पर हमको महर्षि अरविंद ने जो भारतीय सांस्कृतिक परंपराओं पे आत्मसम्मान, गौरव, स्वाभिमान समाज के अंदर पैदा करने के जो विचार दिए थे, और जिस तरह से आज भी पिछले 70 सालों में हमारे एकेडमिक वर्ल्ड के जो प्रोफेसर्स हैं, जो उन्हीं पाश्चात्य दृष्टि को आधार बना करके इस समाज में सोशल साइंसेस को या ह्यूमैनिटीज को डिस्ट्रॉय करके हमारे सामने प्रस्तुत कर रहे हैं, ये वही है। ये आर्चर की आत्मा ही जो है इन सारे हिंदुस्तान के विश्वविद्यालयों में बैठे हुए सो कॉल्ड लिबरल, सो कॉल्ड दिस क्या कहते हैं प्रोग्रेसिव आइडियाज के लोग, उन आर्चर के या उसी पॉलिटिकल जो एक उनका एजेंडा है वेस्टर्न सोसाइटी का, उसको पूरा करने के लिए पिछले 70 सालों में जो हमारे एकेडमिक वर्ल्ड के प्रोफेसर्स लगे हुए हैं, उसकी समाप्ति का, उसका नाश करने का। और महर्षि अरविंद जैसे हमारे देश के जो युग निर्माता है, युग दृष्टि देने वाले लोग हैं, उनकी दृष्टि के आधार पर हमको एक नए भारत का निर्माण करना है। और उस भारत के निर्माण के लिए जो हमारे स्वतंत्रता आंदोलन के जननायकों ने, ऋषियों ने हमको दृष्टि दी है, उसको सामने रखकर हमें एक नए भारत का 21वीं सदी में निर्माण करना है। और हम आशा करते हैं कि महर्षि अरविंद की 150वीं जयंती है और आने वाले 25 साल में भारत की आजादी का शताब्दी वर्ष मनाया जाएगा। तब तक इन 25 वर्षों में हम प्रयास करें कि हम अपने आजादी के गणनायकों, जननायकों के द्वारा इस भारत के निर्माण के, नवनिर्माण के, रीजनरेशन के जो उन्होंने दृष्टि या विचार दिए थे, उनको आधार बनाकर हम एक नए भारत का निर्माण करेंगे, जिसे महर्षि अरविंद ने कहा है कि वो जो भारत होगा, द क्रिएशन ऑफ ए न्यू एंड ग्रेटर इंडिया, उसकी दिशा में हम आगे बढ़ेंगे। मेरा ख्याल है कि मैंने 18 मिनट में अपनी बात समाप्त कर दी है, तो नंदिनी जी बुरा नहीं मानेगी कि मैंने 20 मिनट से अधिक का समय लिया। धन्यवाद।
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद प्रोफेसर भारद्वाज जी। सर, आपके बहुत ही एरुडेट एंड एनलाइटनिंग कीनोट स्पीच के लिए बहुत धन्यवाद सर।
मैं प्रोफेसर नागेश्वर राव जी का बहुत धन्यवाद करना चाहूंगा, क्योंकि आज सर को मैंने सालों के बाद देखा है। आपके साथ काम करके, आपके साथ मिलकर प्रोफेसर नागेश्वर राव जी हमेशा अच्छा लगता रहा है, और आपका सत्संग होता है जब भी आपसे मिलना होता है। आज इस वेबिनार के माध्यम से आपको अभी सुनने का भी मिलेगा, दर्शन तो हो गए। धन्यवाद।
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद सर। Just a brief summary of Professor Bharadwaj's keynote speech. He mentioned Rishi Aurobindo's contributions to cultural renaissance in the context of British imperialism. He mentioned all the socio-religious reformers from Swami Vivekananda to Ramakrishna Dev, who inaugurated an age of spiritual awakening for modern India. And he mentioned Rishi Aurobindo's famous book, Foundation of Indian Culture, published by Aurobindo Ashram. He also spoke about his early endeavor in setting up educational institutions. He gave a new life perspective to humanity by establishing the ashram in Pondicherry. He dealt in detail about Indian intellectual traditions and our philosophy and spiritual traditions. Professor Bharadwaj mentioned Bharat Shakti, which was a eye-opener to the whole world, to the Western world especially. And India is essentially a spiritual society. And Rishi Aurobindo's contributions to Brahminical literary traditions, including Upanishad, and it was a contribution to the Western world, in particular to the world society. With that, we come to an end of the keynote speech. Now I request Dr. Monica Gupta ji, before she delivers her speech, let me introduce her very briefly. Dr. Monica, you are here? Yes. She teaches at the Department of Elementary Education, Gargi College, University of Delhi. She is trained in the field of developmental psychology and has a deep interest in the areas of integral psychology, environmental psychology, integral education, and psychology of self. She is the author of a book titled Shri Aurobindo's Vision of Integral Human Development, a Future Discipline of Study, published by Springer. Now I invite Dr. Monica Gupta ji to deliver her speech on Shri Aurobindo on crisis of human evolution. Shri Monica, Dr. Monica Gupta ji.
Namaskar. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Respected Nageshwar Rao ji, Professor Ramesh Bhardwaj ji, Professor Sachi Shah, Professor Nandini ji, Sunil ji, and all the distinguished participants. Today I'm going to speak about my understanding of the human crisis as seen by Shri Aurobindo, especially when seen from the perspective of evolution of consciousness. I'll just dive straight into the heart of the issue. According to Shri Aurobindo, the main crisis that humanity faces today is the search for integrality, the search for completeness. When we are alone with ourselves, we often feel that there is a sense of incompleteness. Something is missing. What is that is missing? Our life on earth is often, there's a touch of tears in things. There is suffering. There is human experiences marked by dissonance, by fragmentation, by contradictions. And there is a pang of separation, a kind of a suffering in our relationships, in our relational beings. So that is the inner crisis from which the humanity suffers from today. And that is what I'm addressing. Now, if we were to just take a step back and look at the larger sweep of time, Shri Aurobindo in his book, The Human Cycle, gave us an understanding of how the ages pass from the symbolic age to the typal age, to the conventional age, to the rational age, and then onwards to subjective age and spiritual ages. And where we are poised today is the rational age. It's the curve of the rational age. We used the power of human reason to solve many of our problems. Many of the problems of humanity we've tried to solve through mental ideals, the ideals of that we've created together of liberty, fraternity, equality. And many of them we have been able to solve too. But still, at the bottom of it, if we look at it, the existential problems remain the way they are. The problems of suffering, which is at the root of things, still remains. So what is it that we still lack? And of course, we still have not achieved the equality in the society as we'd like to achieve. So according to Shri Aurobindo, if reason is a power, if it is a capacity, it is an evolutionary capacity that came to us to solve something. But each capacity that comes to us also brings with it its limitation. So in his words, what he says, reason is the helper and reason is the bar. He also says, ego is the helper and ego is the bar. Desire is the helper and desire is the bar. Effort helps us till a point and effort becomes a bar. Why do these things, ego, desire, effort, reason, they all belong, according to Shri Aurobindo, to our surface being, to our surface consciousness. And if we have to effect a change in human consciousness towards completion, then we must take a turn inwards towards the deeper recesses of our human subjectivity. To reach what he called is the psychic being. What is the psychic being? This is the Angushta of the Gita. This is the consciousness that is full of joy, which is full of peace, which is full of beauty and aesthetics. It's a fount of love in us. It is the reason why humans progress. It has been called the inner Veda, the mystic fire. There are several names given to it. It is that point of inner quietness when all the outer noise of the outer being quietens down. We go inwards, and there is a sense of being in the presence of something sacred. It is also something that holds our true individuality for us, our Swadharma and our Subha, our true Swadharma and our Swabha. There is a surface understanding of who we are, but the true purpose of being here on earth is something that is held by our psychic being. Our psychic being is supported by our spiritual being. Spiritual being is the vast cosmic consciousness, eternal, infinite, that supports our psychic being from behind. To reach the psychic being, to take this inverse turn, is the most important step in our evolution. When sometimes the outer being quietens down and we hear the call within, we hear the call of that inner lover, the inner guru, and we take that step inwards. That is when we know that there is a completeness, there's a sense of completeness within us, that possibility exists within us. And that is where our crisis can finally be quietened down. Now, how do we take this inner turn? How do we, quieten this noise of the external being? And Shri Aurobindo, in talking about this inner turn, he said that if you go within, there are dangers there as well in going within, because what you will encounter is a true subjectivity and a false subjectivity. The true subjectivity is something that joins, something that unites, something that harmonizes, something that purifies, something that makes us complete. But the false subjectivity is marked by a sense of otherness. It has a quality of the othering. It divides, it mars, it excludes, it oppresses, it marginalizes. So like a Hansa, Paramhansa, we have to be able to move from this consciousness of division towards the consciousness of unity. within. And for that, he says, all fanaticism, all sectarianism, and I'm quoting him, must be shunned. Anything that is in the mind, in the egoistic mind that cries, my God, my Guru, my aspirant, my yoga, anything that cries that is egoistic in us must be shunned from us. And thus, in fact, he says any aspirant of integral yoga will not rest unless he has included all names and forms in this entire cosmic consciousness within his own being and seen to them to be their own. So that is the kind of unity that Shri Aurobindo is talking about. And how do we manifest this unity? How do we manifest this true consciousness? And in that, he says nothing is too small or too great for us to be attempted in this regard. Even the daily life, the relationship between just two people, if we can manage a consciousness of unity there in our relationships, in our everyday life, if we can extend the boundaries of our ego, then what will happen is with the touch of the psychic, the ego will become a conscious willing. Our desires will become pure aspiration. Our effort will no longer be the beating of a water in an empty vessel. It will be touched by a purpose and changed into a design elixir rather than remaining untransformed. So effort itself has to have a purpose. Meaningless effort itself has no value in a sense. So this is what he said in terms of integrating the being and bringing together all the different planes and parts of the being to that central consciousness within. And when we reach that central consciousness, to hold it, to create a spiritual atmosphere, like a protection around us, which we can carry with us as we go through life, and to be able to have what he called two kinds of powers, the static power and the dynamic power. The static power is the power that holds us and keeps us one, and the dynamic power goes and acts in life and changes and transforms life as we go through it. So he talked about both these powers. And also he said that we must, if you look at human evolution, we have grown through our families, we grow through our community, we grow through our nation, to our feelings of nationhood. And these are very pure feelings. But at one point, even these can become an impediment, especially if they are harnessed by our ego. So our sense of nationhood also can become false nationhood if it becomes a false nation soul, if it is harnessed to our own ego. So that obstruction itself needs to be overcome if we have to become, as he said, a kind of the whole humanity needs to be within us and not just the limited boundaries. So while we grow through all the things around us, our final destination is the unity of the humankind. And in this, he said that even politics, our social institutions, our personal relationships can be transformed. In politics, they can be, it can be imbued with a greater tact, a greater intuition. Even social institutions can become much more luminous if we were to take care and that be much more not just empathetic, but he used the term identity, that we have to be able to identify with each thing around us, each person around us, and that's how we will be able to still the pang of separation that marks our human existence. If you look at the fruits of the rational age, for example, I mentioned the ideas of fraternity, equality, liberty. They have helped us a lot, in overcoming the caste barriers, removing so much inequality from around us. But according to Shri Aurobindo, our pang of separation will only end if these qualities were to blossom forth from our very soul. He gave us a very interesting concept. He gave us a concept of what he called the spiritual anarchy. He said that, this is a concept that brings together oneness and freedom and diversity all at the same time. So he said that the growth of one person should not be at the cost of others. And when we grow spiritually, there is a kind of a spontaneous flowering from within. It is as though we are spontaneously expressing our Swabhav and our Swadharma. And in expressing that, we also aid the unique expression of all people around us. So that's the kind of gentle consciousness. That's a kind of karuna and a sense of oneness and that he talked about. And he said that to solve the problems of humanity, we must be able to nurture this consciousness of oneness, because it is the power of love. And power of love is something that is capable of removing all obstructions. So there is any problem, whether it's a human relationship or it's an international issue, that oneness needs to be invoked for us to be able to find the right consciousness to be able to solve that problem. He said all problems of human existence are essentially problems of harmony, and it is the harmony that we must be able to find. And I'll not take too much time, but what he's, he said that our journeys are journeys towards becoming Swayam Prakash. There is a light of our own that we possess. There is an inner sun that we possess, and we must travel towards it and become one with it. Become one, manifest what he called the mind of light, and the mind, the light of our beings. And in doing so, we will, not be one, not just with human beings, but he said with all beings and things, with this luminous web of life that surrounds us. And that is how the life on earth will become the life divine. Thank you so much. I hope I haven't taken too much time. I can go on, but you never know when 20 minutes are over. So thank you so much for calling me here and letting me speak.
Thank you very much, Dr. Monica ji, for a very soul-stirring and illuminating speech of yours. And you have timed yourself very perfectly. That's so great of you. And before a very brief summary of Dr. Monica ji's talk is as follows. The talk has its focus on the personal, social, and technological crisis within which our evolutionary stories are located when viewed from Shri Aurobindo's perspective. The malaise of individual, social, technological patterning is examined from the perspective of mechanicalness, inertia, and fractures in human consciousness. The presentation looks for potential ways of healing dissonant patterns based on Shri Aurobindo's individual and social evolutionary philosophy. With that, we come to an end of Dr. Monica ji's speech. Now, before I invite Professor Sunit Verma ji of the Department of Psychology, let me introduce him very briefly. Professor Sunit Verma is a professor at the Department of Psychology, University of Delhi. His doctoral work was on the scientific paradigm in psychology, challenges and possibilities, which critiqued the logical positivist paradigm in psychology and reviewed the potency of cultural psychology and spiritual transpersonal psychology. His contribution has been more holistic, meaningful, and fruitful way of doing psychology. Professor Verma's early work was in the area of philosophy of psychology, theoretical psychology. He now works in the area of spirituality and psychology, namely Vedanta, Yoga, Sufism, Buddhism, the Christian mystical tradition, and their links with Sri Aurobindo's integral yoga. A large number of MPhil and PhD students have been awarded degrees under his supervision in University of Delhi. He has also headed many administrative assignments in University of Delhi. Now I invite Professor Sunit Verma ji, to deliver his speech, Shri Aurobindo and the Future of Humanity. Sunit ji. Professor Sunit ji.
Yes, namaste.
हाँ जी, namaste.
So, I requested you for a little extra time because I find it difficult to wind up in 15-20 minutes. So you were kind enough to grant me some 30-35 minutes.
Yes,
And,
I mean, the much you can sum up after 20 minutes. It's okay. It's okay.
So, we are talking about a person, a figure who perhaps after Adi Shankaracharya ji in the 8th century AD, whose contribution has been immense as an individual, as a spiritual figure, a yogi, an intellectual genius. And there's no way that one can actually do justice to that in a few minutes. Yes, one can focus on specific aspects as Dr. Monica did, psychological aspects. So I will just begin with a quote. Am I audible to everyone?
Yes, you
Yes,
are
sir.
audible.
You are audible, sir. You are very much.
Right. So I'll begin with a quote of Shri Aurobindo. It would be a tragic irony of fate if India were to throw away her spiritual heritage at the very moment when in the rest of the world there is more and more a turning towards her, meaning India, for spiritual help and a saving light. This must not and will surely not happen. But it cannot be said that the danger is not there. So Shri Aurobindo cautions us. And as Bhardwaj said, our spiritual heritage is something that at least for the time being, we have largely lost in touch with, especially the urban masses. Not so much in the rural context. I will briefly talk about some significant life events. His biographical sketch without going into any details at all. So chronology. So he was born on 15th August 1872 and India got its independence on 15th August. And Shri Aurobindo very explicitly said that it is not a coincidence that India got its independence on 15th August. So a person of that stature is not simply working in the physical world, but the spiritual, occult level of energies, plus the guidance that he gave to major Congress leaders from 1908, he was in prison and then he left in 1910. And they kept coming to him till late stages of his life. So he was sent by his father to England in 1879. And his father didn't want him to learn much about Indian culture. So he even didn't know Bengali as such. So he studied English, and then the principal in the school thought he was brilliant, coached him personally in Greek and Latin. Later at Cambridge College, he got the highest marks, which is a unbroken record till date, till today, more than 115 years back, 120 years back. So then he got selected for the ICS and decided not to go for it because he didn't want to serve the British. He wanted to work for the independence of India. So he came back in 1893 to Bombay and then to Baroda at the invitation of the Maharaja of Baroda. Officially, he was a professor in the college teaching French, later English, and also served informally as a secretary to the Maharaja. 1900 onwards, he started working with so-called secret groups in Maharashtra and Bengal for the freedom movement. And in 1907, he was publishing a magazine called Bande Mataram, and he was arrested because he was criticizing the British for what they were doing. At the same time, without spelling it out, between the words, you had to understand what he was trying to say. And in 1908, till then, he did not really believe in spirituality and didn't have understanding of yoga. But he read somewhere that yoga can enhance your powers. So in Baroda, he went to a yoga teacher, Bhaskar Lele, and said, I want to learn yoga. Bhaskar Lele ji said, why? He said, I want to enhance my powers so that I can be more effective in the freedom movement. 1908 January. So Bhaskar Lele ji said, okay, so when do you want to start? It was 4 p.m. in the afternoon approximately. He said, oh, we can start just now. So Lele ji said, well, the first step in yoga is to silence your mind. It's not hot yoga. So Shri Aurobindo said, how do I do it? He said, close your eyes. Whenever a thought comes, visualize, catch hold of it and throw it away. Shri Aurobindo did not open his eyes for 1.5 days. When he opened his eyes, he told Lele ji, now my mind is absolutely silent. So that's when he had this experience of the Brahman consciousness for the very first time. And he realized that spirituality is for real. That's how it entered into his life. Because he was such a formidable figure, because of his writings, because of his speeches in the Congress, Indian National Congress, the British actually started fearing this man. And they thought that we have to get rid of him one way or the other. And there was a bomb attack in which Shri Aurobindo's younger brother was involved. So they implicated him. He was in prison for almost a year or a little more. But eventually he was acquitted. And then when he was in the prison, he had certain visions. Because in the prison, for the first time, I mean, he did not believe in God. He was an atheist. First time in the prison, he asked this question. He looked upward. He said, God, if you are there, I want to work for the independence of India. Why am I here? Then in the night, he got a vision from Vasudeva, Shri Krishna, who said, freedom of India is not your work. India will get its freedom. Your work is something else. It is for humanity. That day onward, he saw the divine in every person, in every being, in every entity. In the jailer, in the tree, in the bird. And then shortly after he was released, he realized that now he has to move away from the freedom struggle. And he went to Pondicherry, which was French state. And then while he was there, a French lady, Mira Alfasa, later called a mother, her husband suggested that he write on Indian spirituality, the Vedas and Upanishads. Actually, when he came to India, he didn't know any Indian language. And he started looking at the literature and it was all in Sanskrit. And so he taught himself Sanskrit. Within a year and within 4 years, he mastered Sanskrit, self-taught, and studied the Vedas, the Upanishads, and he was a poet by heart, Kalidas, everything. Many years later, he wrote commentaries on these things. And so he, senior Congress leaders kept coming to him, even pleading with him to come back to Calcutta. He said no. He said, this is not my work, but I can guide you. So he was involved, actively involved in his own way in the independence movement and at the spiritual occult level also. And one or two more things. Gandhiji was opposed to the British fighting against the Germans. He said ki ahimsa and they should give up their arms. And Shri Aurobindo said, no, I'm not a pacifist. If somebody points a gun and they're going to shoot me, I will defend myself. So he opposed many of the ideas of Subhash Chandra Bose, Mahatma Gandhi, and Jawaharlal Nehru later also. He was critical. It's documented. So in 1912, there's a small quote where he says, I write not for the orthodox, पुराने विचारों वाले जो हैं, बहुत conservative हैं, nor for those who have discovered a new orthodoxy, समाज और पंथ. मैं इन सब चीजों में विश्वास नहीं रखता हूँ. Not for the unbeliever, नास्तिक. I write for those who acknowledge reason. Reason, rationality is important, but do not identify reason with Western materialism. That is not the only path through reason. He was critical of that. Who are skeptics, मतलब he said he appreciates skeptics, जो doubt करते हैं, but not unbelievers. Who, admitting the claims of modern thought, still believe in India, her mission, her gospel, her immortal life, and her eternal rebirth. तो ये उसका एसेंस है. भारद्वाज जी संस्कृत के विद्वान हैं, लेकिन मुझे मालूम नहीं है कि उनको श्री अरविंद ने जो कंट्रीब्यूशन किया है संस्कृत के प्रति, उसकी उनको इज अवेयर, उनको उसकी इन डेप्थ नॉलेज है कि नहीं है. 20th सेंचुरी में जो 3 मोस्ट आउटस्टैंडिंग स्कॉलर्स थे संस्कृत के, वो थे स्वामी वेद भारती, स्वामी राम के डिसाइपल, दयानंद सरस्वती जी और श्री अरविंद. और उन्होंने संस्कृत की एक ओरिजिनल लिंग्विस्टिक थ्योरी दी, जिसमें वो उसके रूट साउंड्स पे जाते थे कि जो साउंड, जो मांत्रिक क्वालिटी होती है, जिसका मतलब ये है कि कोई श्लोक है, मतलब जो हमारी ट्रेडिशनल नॉलेज थी, जो हमारी वैदिक नॉलेज थी, तो वो इट वाज नॉट सपोज टू बी कि हमने सोच के उसको कंपोज किया है. इट वाज सपोज टू बी समथिंग व्हिच इज रिवील्ड टू अस, इट्स डायरेक्टली रिसीव्ड एंड ट्रांसमिटेड थ्रू अस, एंड फिर हम उसको लिखते हैं. तो उन्होंने इस बात को समझते हुए ये कहा कि जो उसका रूट साउंड्स हैं, आप उसको समझिए, उसका आधार समझिए, और फिर आप मंत्र का मीनिंग आपको मालूम भी नहीं है, उच्चारण करेंगे तो आपको उसका अनुभव होगा. और उसमें बहुत डेप्थ में गए, ऋग्वेद में पढ़ा उन्होंने मंत्र के बारे में. और उसके बाद एक रिचर्ड हार्ट स्कॉलर हैं पांडिचेरी में, उन्होंने काफी काम किया इस पे. वो अंग्रेजी में उसको ले आए, मांत्रिक क्वालिटी. लाइव डिवाइन में भी है जो भारद्वाज जी कह रहे थे, और सावित्री तो करीब करीब पूरी मांत्रिक उसमें लिखी गई है. आपको ना समझ में आए, मदर भी कहती थी उसको पढ़ लीजिए आप. तो वो एक मतलब संस्कृत से उन्होंने इंस्पायर होके ये लिया था, प्लस संस्कृत के मास्टरी थी उनको. उन्होंने ये आर्य जर्नल 1914 से 1921 तक लिखा था, जिसमें वेद पे, उपनिषद पे, गीता पे, उनकी ओरिजिनल 3-4 राइटिंग्स सब पे उन्होंने लिखा था. तो ये एक ऑर्डिनरी कंट्रीब्यूशन नहीं है. वी हैव नॉट हैड ए जीनियस intellectual or a yogi of that stature for centuries, which we do not realize as Indians. In the West, some people appreciate it more than we do as Indians. यूनिवर्सिटी में तो आया ही नहीं है करीब करीब, एकेडमिक्स में हमारे आया ही नहीं है करीब करीब. ये ट्रेजेडी है, कोलोसल ट्रेजेडी है. लास्ट 1 or 2 पॉइंट्स. तो एक मोनिका जी ने मेंशन किया था कि हमारी प्रेसिंग प्रॉब्लम है इस समय, वो है कि हम लोग के बीच में डिवाइड्स आ जाते हैं, चाहे वो कम्युनल हो, बिगिनिंग नेशनल हो, रशिया यूक्रेन है, या और भी 2 कंट्रीज हैं, या इंडिया पाकिस्तान है. जो ह्यूमन यूनिटी का जो बेसिक मसला है, तो उसपे जो श्री अरबिंदो का जिस तरह से उन्होंने अप्रोच किया था, इसका क्योर क्या है ह्यूमन यूनिटी का, तो वो मैं कोट कर रहा हूँ, उनके वर्ड्स नहीं है, डॉक्टर आलोक पांडे हैं, उनका पेपर था, द योगा ऑफ द इंडियन नेशन. टू अंडरस्टैंड what this deeper cure is and how we can find it, we have to first understand India's complexity. For the being of a nation, जो nation का जो soul है, as ancient as India is beyond, is bound to be complex and rich with many-sided experience. बहुत सारे angles से उसको आप देख सकते हैं. हमारा literature और जो हमारा साहित्य है वो ऐसे ही लिखा गया है. महाभारत में जो कहानी आती है, अलग अलग तरफ से बार बार उसको अप्रोच करते हैं. There are at least three layers at which India exists. First, of course, is the surface India, which people notice when they look at India superficially. This surface gives the impression of a huge building, broken in several places, with the walls cracked and the plastered disfigured. अखबार में रोज पढ़ते हैं हम लोग. But right behind this, we find it bubbling with activity and dynamism, as if a lot of outworn things needed mending. चीजें जो हैं बिगड़ गई हैं, डैमेज आ गया है, उसमें हमें मेंडिंग करनी है, उसको ठीक करना है. And a lot of work was going on. When we have won this first shock and moved a little towards its inner being, थोड़ा गहराई में जब हम जाते हैं इंडिया की, we feel the sweetness of a fresher air. देखिए एक ताजी हवा आती है, जो नालों की हवा नहीं, हम लोगों के घरों के आसपास आती है जो बदबू. And moved a little towards its inner being. A different atmosphere, the kind of which one finds nowhere in the world. It is literally to say Air India, the real Air India. This inner atmosphere carries in itself something that supports and nurtures hope, washes off cynicism, and gives strength and peace despite all outer appearances. While most nations exist largely on the material and intellectual plane, we find in India the sudden surprise of meeting in life many shades and colors. We are led into the inner India through many a door, each carved with rich artistry, even though the door appears as if it had gathered dust over the centuries. On the surface is the shadow. In the depth, she carries a light that is greater than reason and thought. And if brought to the forefront, the light can solve problems that seem insoluble to the human race. The problem of unity that threatens India and the world today can only be addressed from that level. How to harmonize this? Only from the outpouring of our spiritual nature. Monica ji ने psychic being की बात की थी, जो हमारी true personality है, जो हमारा true self है, वो हर एक जने के अंदर है, लेकिन वो ढका हुआ है. तो उसके टच में हम आ जाएंगे तो अपने आप वो जागृत हो जाता है, वो हमारी लाइफ का एक गाइडिंग फोर्स हो जाता है, वो हमारा इनर गुरु है, वो हमको बताएगा, मार्ग दर्शन मिलेगा हमको उसके जरिए. तो ये चीज हमारे यहाँ आज से नहीं, बहुत लंबे समय से है. वैष्णविज्म जब से जागृत हुआ था, बाद में सूफी आए थे, उन्होंने भी हाँ कंट्रीब्यूट किया. गुरु नानक देव ने रिवाइव किया उसको, तो वो चलता आ रहा है. भाई भी उसको स्पिरिट को टेकअप करते हैं. साइकोलॉजी में ज्यादा नहीं बोलूंगा, मोनिका जी ने बोला है, तो मैं एजुकेशन को टच करूंगा. लास्ट जो श्री अरविंद ने कहा था इसके बारे में, उन्होंने 1910 में लिखा था एजुकेशन सिस्टम के बारे में जो इंडिया में उस समय था, और 5 मार्च 1910 में ही had written this. और आज भी 100% ये लागू है। तो मैं इसको 5 मिनट का समय दे रहा हूँ। A very remarkable feature of modern training education, which has been subjected in India to a reductio and absurdum, छोटा अपने bits and pieces में और absurd बना दिया है, is the practice of teaching by snippets. थोड़ा ये, थोड़ा वो, थोड़ा ये, थोड़ा वो, थोड़ा ये भी छिड़क दिया, थोड़ा वो भी छिड़क दिया. A subject is taught a little at a time in conjunction with a host of others. बहुत सी चीजें आप साथ साथ पढ़ा रहे हैं. With the result that what might be well learned in a single year is badly learned in 7, and the boy or girl goes out ill-equipped, served with imperfect parcels of knowledge, master of none of the great developments of human knowledge. The old system, Gurukul, was to teach 1 or 2 subjects well and thoroughly and then proceed to others. ये देखिए हमारे स्कूल, कॉलेज, यूनिवर्सिटी सब जगह लागू है. And certainly it was a more rational system than the modern. If it did not impart so much varied information, it built up a deeper, nobler, and more real culture. Much of the shallowness, discursive lightness, and fickle mutability of the average modern mind आज भी उतनी ही लागू is due to the vicious principle of teaching by snippets. The one defect that can be alleged against the old system was that the subject earliest learned might fade from the mind of the student while he was mastering his later studies. भूल जाएगा बाद में. But the excellent training given to the memory by the ancients obviated the incidence of this defect. In the future education, we need not bind ourselves either by the ancient or the modern system, but select only the most perfect and rapid means of mastering knowledge. Last paragraph. In defense of the modern system, it is alleged that the attention of children is easily tired and cannot be subjected to the strain of long application to a single subject. The frequent change of subject gives rest to the mind. आज का argument है, 1910 में लिखा. The question naturally arises: Are the children of modern times so different from the ancients? And if so, have you not made them so by discouraging prolonged concentration? और आपके कंप्यूटर्स और गूगल और आपके व्हाट्सएप, जिसको हम लोग मॉनिटर नहीं करते हैं बाय एंड लार्ज अपने घरों में. A child of 7 or 8, and that is the earliest permissible age for the commencement of any regular kind of study, is capable of a good deal of concentration if he is interested. Interest is, after all, the basis of concentration. अब ये सुनिएगा ध्यान से. We make his lessons or her lessons supremely uninteresting and repellent to the child. अब बोर कर देते हैं उसको. A harsh compulsion, the basis of teaching, number लाने हैं, and then complain of his restless inattention. The substitution of a natural self-education by the child for the present unnatural system will remove this objection of inability. A child, like a man or a woman, if she is interested, much prefers to get to the end of her subject rather than leave it unfinished. पूरी कहानी जाना चाहते हैं, सब समझना चाहते हैं, गहराई में जाना चाहता है. और मुझे याद है बचपन में जब मैंने केमिस्ट्री पढ़ी थी, केमिकल बॉन्डिंग पढ़ी थी, मैं टीचर से क्वेश्चन पूछता था और पूछता था, वो चुप करा देते थे. लकीली किताबों से पढ़ लेता था मैं. 9th में जो पढ़ा रहे थे मैंने 11th का पढ़ के मैंने उसको मास्टर कर लिया. मेरे दोस्त भी थे ऐसे एक दो. To lead him or her on step by step, interesting and absorbing him each as it comes, until he or she has mastered her subject, is the true art of teaching. एजुकेशन में बहुत लिखा है, मोनिका जी की तो इस पे एक्सपर्टीज है, और मैं कोशिश करता हूँ कि इसको अप्लाई करूँ अपने टीचिंग में, अपने लाइफ में. और आखिरी 2 मिनट अगर समय मुझे दिया जाए, क्योंकि भारद्वाज जी ने ये चर्चा की थी, तो श्री अरबिंदो के राइटिंग्स में जो 2 वर्ड्स आते हैं मोर देन एनी अदर वर्ड्स, एक है कॉन्शियसनेस और एक है एवोल्यूशन, लेकिन वो साथ साथ यूज होते हैं इन अ फ्रेज कॉल्ड एवोल्यूशन ऑफ कॉन्शियसनेस। वो हमारी जो एग्जिस्टेंस की स्टोरी है वो इस तरह से बताते हैं कि डार्विन ने जो बताया ठीक है, फिजियोलॉजिकल चेंजेस आए हैं, एक कोई क्रीचर था ओशन में, धीरे धीरे एवोल्यूशन हुआ, फिर वो हाफ लैंड हाफ सी हाफ लैंड का, फिर वो ऐसे ऐसे मैमल्स आए, फिर प्राइमेट्स आए, फिर ह्यूमन बीइंग आए। लेकिन ये जो एवोल्यूशन हो रहा है, ये जो फिजियोलॉजिकल चेंजेस आ रहे हैं, they support the inner experience, our inner awareness, so we need to reflect on that. तो एक यूनिसेलुलर एक्टिव ऑर्गेनिज्म अमीबा, पैरामीशियम, या एक मेढक है, वो कुएं में रहता है, कूप मंडूक कहते हैं, उसको लगता है यही मेरा यूनिवर्स है। एक बंदर है, उसको लगता है ये 4 गांव हमारा यूनिवर्स है। फिर हम ह्यूमन बीइंग में आते हैं। ह्यूमन बीइंग में हमारे जितने भी सिस्टम्स हैं स्पिरिचुअलिटी के, दे टॉक अबाउट डिफरेंट लेवल्स। चाहे आप तमस रजस सत्व ले लीजिए, चाहे आप तैत्तिरीय उपनिषद का अन्नमय कोश, प्राणमय कोश, मनमय कोश, विज्ञानमय कोश, आनंदमय कोश, चाहे आप 7 चक्र ले लें, दे आर टॉकिंग अबाउट दिस एवोल्यूशन, इनर एवोल्यूशन। श्री अरबिंदो हैज इलैबोरेटेड ऑन दैट इज द ह्यूमन जर्नी। और हमारे जितने भी रिचुअल्स हैं जो सीजन से छोड़ के, उससे अलग हट के, फसल कटती है और उस तरह की चीजें, उससे लिंक्ड अप है। एक एग्जांपल, नवरात्र। नवरात्र का ओरिजिन क्या है और सिग्निफिकेंस क्या है? नवरात्र सांख्य फिलॉसफी पे बेस्ड है कि हमारे अंदर 3 गुण हैं, तमस रजस सत्व। तमस में हम आलसी हैं, कुछ करना नहीं चाहते। रजस में हम एक्टिव हो जाते हैं, डायरेक्शन क्लैरिटी नहीं है। सत्व में क्लैरिटी है। तो नवरात्र रिमाइंडर था, और साल में 4 बार होता था पहले, कि दैट इज द ह्यूमन जर्नी एंड वी मस्ट फोकस ऑन दैट, रिमाइंड आवरसेल्व्स अबाउट द इंपॉर्टेंस ऑफ दैट। पहले 3 दिन नवरात्र में काली पूजा होती थी, जो हमें गाइड करती थी कि हम तमस से रजस की तरफ जाएं। अगले 3 दिन होती थी लक्ष्मी पूजा, जो हमें रजस से सत्व की तरफ ले जाती थी। और आखिरी 3 दिन सरस्वती पूजा होती थी, जो हमें सत्व से सिद्धि, रियलाइजेशन की तरफ ले जाएगी। 9th इवनिंग के रात को सिद्धि के सिग्निफिकेंस। हमारे सारे रिचुअल्स हैं, चाहे मैरिज रिचुअल्स हैं, चाहे डेथ रिचुअल्स हैं, सब हमें यही रिमाइंड करते हैं, व्हाट इज दिस जर्नी ऑफ लाइफ, दिस एवोल्यूशन। और ये मैंने श्री अरविंद की राइटिंग से पकड़ा, इसको मुझे समझ में आया। Largely foundations of Indian culture and also some other sources. That is the evolution of consciousness. Our true personality is not our thinking mind, जो मानिका जी ने कहा, it is a soul, आत्मा, या इसको श्री अरविंद कहते हैं साइकिक बीइंग, जो उससे हम कनेक्ट कर पाएंगे, उसके थ्रू हम जी पाएंगे, तो हमको गाइडेंस मिलेगी, श्योर गाइडेंस कि ये राइट रॉन्ग क्या है, कि आपको डिसीजन कैसे लेना चाहिए, और हम एक जॉयफुल स्टेट में रहेंगे, कंपैशनेट होंगे, लविंग होंगे अपने आप, बिकॉज दैट इज व्हाट वी आर। वी आर क्रीचर्स ऑफ लव, जॉय एंड कंपैशन, पीस। बचपन में जब हम लोग सब खुश थे, खिलौना आया, टूट गया, रोए, खत्म हो गया। लेकिन हम भूल गए ना, सब कुछ तो कंडीशनल हो गया कि लेटेस्ट आईफोन चाहिए, भाई इतनी बड़ी गाड़ी चाहिए, इतना बड़ा कोठी चाहिए, तो आपने 50 कंडीशंस उस पर इम्पोज कर दी। हमारी अपनी गलती है, बुद्धिज्म ने हमें ये सिखाया है। इट इज आवर ओन वे ऑफ थिंकिंग व्हिच कॉजेस सफरिंग। तो ये मतलब निचोड़ है इंडियन स्पिरिचुअलिटी की और श्री अरविंद के कंट्रीब्यूशन की। मैं उनका भक्त हूँ 20 साल से, मोनिका जी और पहले से हैं, मेरी दोस्त भी हैं, और उन्होंने मुझे इंट्रोड्यूस किया था मदर श्री अरबिंदो से, इसके लिए मैं हमेशा आभारी रहूँगा। तो बस दैट्स माय हम्बल शेयरिंग। थैंक यू।
Thank you very much, Professor Sunit Verma ji, for a detailed and enlightening speech. We are indeed informed. A very brief summary of his speech is as follows. I'll give a very, very brief rendering of it. For his revolutionary ontology of consciousness, Shri Aurobindo bases himself on the Vedantic view of consciousness. The comprehensive supramental transformation of all aspects of human nature is the central theme of Shri Aurobindo's work. With that, we come to an end of all the three speeches of today's webinar. Now I request and invite our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Sir Professor Nageshwar Rao ji, to deliver his presidential address. Sir.
Good noon to all of you. First of all, I'm happy that the School of Interdisciplinary and Transdisciplinary Studies has organized a national webinar on the occasion of the 150th birth anniversary of Shri Aurobindo ji. Listen to Professor Bharadwaj ji, Dr. Monica ji, and also Professor Sunit Verma ji. Every word which they have chosen to speak, that carries a meaning. And that is quite relevant to all of us. Celebrating 150th birth anniversary of Shri Aurobindo, it is really a great tribute to the Maharshi ji and his vision for humanity. We are fortunate enough that he was born on 15th of August, the day of independence. Way back in 1872, but we got the independence when he was alive also. His wisdom about Indianism, the Indian philosophy, spirituality, is narrated clearly and vividly by Bharadwaj ji. I was continuously listening to all the speakers, all the three speakers. And the light which we got, that is really inspirational to us. As has been rightly pointed out, that Aurobindo ji was sent to have his early studies in England with a specific focus that he should imbibe his culture, his knowledge, primarily the Western ideas, Western education system, and the Western culture. He exploited that opportunity, and thereby he studied several languages, the French, Italian, Spanish, Greek, Latin. But later on, a born Indian has born Indian culture, Indian philosophy, Indian traditions, Indian spirituality. And that has inculcated him a person who is having the nationalistic feeling for the country. And thereby, in his latter years, when he came back to India, he joined the political movement, the freedom movement. But the philosophy which he nurtured, that is quite important. Because he always talked about the basics of sattva. That is integral yoga. It is nothing but the theory of mind. It is the integration of psychology and spirituality. Not so easy to understand. The Western theorists, what they said is the motivational hierarchy. If you look at the Maslow's theory of hierarchy, what it says, there are levels from lower to higher levels. That is step to step that needs they cultivate to a very high level, where the spirituality comes at the top. And that is very, very critical to nurture our philosophy for humanity. And that is what he visualized. He was a poet, he was a social reformer, he was a freedom fighter. And we know, we call him a saint, Maharshi. Multifarious personality. Studied Indian languages also. For me, listening to distinguished speakers, it's a great opportunity. Listening and comprehending the philosophy of Aurobindo, that is a virtue which we all have to sustain amongst ourselves. Fortunately, the School of Interdisciplinary Studies runs a program in philosophy. And there, the emphasis is there on Maharshi's Aurobindo integral yoga theory. Maybe our students, they will be much more benefited by the enlightened presentation of all the three distinguished speakers. I request the school that maybe a template can be prepared and be made available to all our learners. Because the inputs which we are getting, and that too in simple language, that too specifically focusing the humanistic approach which Aurobindo ji has visualized, that also needs to be inculcated amongst our young minds, amongst our young learners. I'm happy that school is remembering birth anniversary, 150th birth anniversary of Aurobindo ji. Through that, we can also see that what are the other areas, what are the other treasures available with our Indian ancient wisdom, and that can be traced out and can be used for strengthening our philosophical base, strengthening our spiritual base, or maybe the integration of the spiritual and the psychological base. That is the message which we got from today's one-day workshop. And I must compliment the school for taking such initiative. And I also thank all the three distinguished speakers who spared their valuable time for us to enlighten us, to inspire us, and to motivate us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, Honorable Vice Chancellor, Sir Professor Nageshwar Rao ji, for your inspiring speech, and especially your narrative on Shri Aurobindo's contributions to Indian spiritual tradition with reference to his integral yoga and its various aspects and Indian nationalism. Thank you, sir, for your words of support and encouragement. Thank you. Now I request, we are at the end of the session, I request our colleague, Dr. Ashutosh Vyas, Consultant Philosophy, to render the vote of thanks. Dr. Ashutosh.
नमस्कार आप सभी को। धन्यवाद सुनना और कहना कई बार अच्छा लगता है, और इसी धन्यवाद के क्रम में सर्वप्रथम हमारे विद्यापीठ की तरफ से हमारे विश्वविद्यालय परिवार के संरक्षक, आज के कार्यक्रम के अध्यक्ष, सम्माननीय कुलपति महोदय प्रोफेसर नागेश्वर राव जी को कार्यक्रम की अनुमति के लिए और उन सारी सहूलियतों, संयोजनों, दृष्टिकोणों और अवसरों के लिए जिनसे हम अपने अकादमिक कार्यों में प्रेरित और उन्नतशील होते रहते हैं, आपका बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद, आभार सर। हमारे विश्वविद्यालय के सभी कुलपतियों का उनकी शुभेच्छाओं एवं सहयोग के लिए बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद, आभार। संगोष्ठी का लावण्य वक्ता होते हैं। हमारा सौभाग्य है कि हमें आप विद्वत जनों को सुनने का अवसर प्राप्त हुआ, और स्नेहिल बात यह है कि तिथि और समय परिवर्तन के हमारे आग्रहों को आपने सहर्ष स्वीकार कर हमें चिंता मुक्त रखा। हम संस्कृत और संस्कृति के मूर्धन्य विद्वान प्रोफेसर रमेश चंद्र भारद्वाज, माननीय कुलपति महर्षि वाल्मीकि संस्कृत विश्वविद्यालय, दिल्ली विश्वविद्यालय मनोविज्ञान विभाग के भारतीय मनोविज्ञान एवं मनोविज्ञान के दर्शन के विद्वत अध्येता प्रोफेसर सुनीत वर्मा, दिल्ली विश्वविद्यालय से संबद्ध शिक्षाविद मनोविज्ञानी डॉक्टर मोनिका गुप्ता जी का अपने हृदय से, अंतःस्थल से कोटि कोटि आभार व्यक्त करते हैं। अंतः विषयक एवं पराविषयक अध्ययन विद्यापीठ की निदेशिका प्रोफेसर शची शाह का धन्यवाद, आपके प्रशासनिक, अकादमिक सहयोग, संयोजन एवं उत्साहजनक संलग्नता के लिए, जिनसे उन्नति के सोपानों को छूने की लालसा उत्पन्न होती रहती है। और
Ashutosh, please unmute yourself.
हेलो,
Yes, you are audible now.
कार्यक्रम की सूत्रधार, संयोजिका, दर्शन शास्त्र कार्यक्रम की समन्वयक प्रोफेसर नंदिनी सिन्हा कपूर का धन्यवाद। आप न केवल दर्शन शास्त्र के हमारे कार्यक्रम की, अपितु हमारे विद्यापीठ की मातृतुल्य आधार भूमि है। आपकी चिरंतन सोच इस कार्यक्रम को नए आयामों में सृजित करेगी, ऐसा हमारा विश्वास है। हमारे विद्यापीठ के सुधी अध्यापक जन, विद्वत जन, प्रोफेसर शुभांगी वैद्य, प्रोफेसर वी रूपनी, डॉक्टर सदानंद साहू, डॉक्टर वेंकट रमन, डॉक्टर खुमन, डॉक्टर सुस्मिता भास्कर, डॉक्टर दीक्षा दवे एवं समस्त सहयोगी स्टाफ का सहयोग और शुभ चिंताओं के लिए हार्दिक आभार। ऑनलाइन शिक्षा केंद्र के निदेशक प्रोफेसर सुबोध केशरवानी और अन्य सहयोगी जनों का आभार, जिनकी वजह से यह कार्यक्रम सुचारू ढंग से गतिमान रहा। पोस्टर चित्रण से लेकर ऑनलाइन माध्यमों के निरूपण और संचालन के लिए आपका बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। राजेश जी को सूचना वितरण एवं प्रसारण के लिए बहुत बहुत कोटि कोटि आभार, धन्यवाद। कार्यक्रम में आपकी गरिमामयी उपस्थिति एवं संवाद के लिए विभिन्न विश्वविद्यालयों के उपस्थित अध्यापकों, विद्यार्थियों, शोधार्थियों, इग्नू के विद्यापीठों, केंद्रों, क्षेत्रीय केंद्रों के निदेशकों, संकाय सदस्यों, अकादमिक सहयोगियों, शोधार्थियों, शिक्षार्थियों का कोटिशः धन्यवाद। एक बार आप सभी का पुनः धन्यवाद। नमस्कार।
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद डॉक्टर आशुतोष। धन्यवाद प्रोफेसर सची शाह जी।
Thank you everyone for joining us today. बहुत बहुत आपका हृदय से आभार हमें ज्वाइन करने के लिए, इस सेमिनार में अपनी उपस्थिति देने के लिए धन्यवाद। नमस्कार।